On paper, the premise of Horizon Zero Dawn is kind of cool, almost admirable for a high-budget mainstream release. It's similar to Shinsekai Yori, where you have a tribalist society that lives in small villages in a fantasy-like setting, but instead of it being in the distant past, it takes place in a future where our current-day society has collapsed. Despite this, every time Sony would show this game off, it never appealed to me. The settings seemed to be executed with the grace of a DeviantArt user that writes short stories to justify his fan art, and the gameplay reeked of Ubisoft paint-by-numbers pseudo-open world game design. I was thoroughly convinced that this would be Far Cry Primal in the third person with robot dinosaurs and silly outfits, but what I ended up playing was something completely different than I expected. The game starts with a lengthy prologue that is well over an hour long and completely linear. You start off as a young Aloy who is easily the ugliest video game character in recent memory, and not just because of that face. Her proportions are awkward, with a head that seems far too large for the body and hair that was styled by a blind man. The plot is all over the place and can't seem to find a direction that it wants to spend more than 5 minutes on. Initially, Aloy is introduced as being this motherless, cursed outcast child that's being taken care of by these discount versions of the mother characters from Mad Max Fury Road. She's then placed in the care of the outcast Rost, who acts as the stereotypical father who's not really the father character. The game then cuts to a 6-year-old Aloy that now desperately wants to know who her mother is, so Rost begins preparing her for the Proving, where the winner is allowed anything they desire from the mother characters. In her case, finding out who her mother is. It is at this point where the game temporarily goes down the path of being a cheesy young adult novel, directly ripping off the Hunger Games. There's even a moment where the bratty bully kid she met for 5 seconds when she was young makes an appearance during the competition to reminisce on all the time they spent together, all 5 seconds of it.
Stay away, no mother!
Aw, you even try to dress like a real Nora. Not that it fools anyone.
So this is how it's gonna be with you, is it?
This is how it's gonna be with everyone, Outcast. You belong in the wilds, not Mother's heart. And you definitely don't belong in the Proving.
It really doesn't get more cliché than this. It's also worth noting that the voice acting in the prologue is boring, flat, and lifeless. The breaking point for me was when this guy came in dressed like an Elder Scrolls character wielding a chain gun. I just could not help but laugh.
The red hair dies now! Everyone, forward!
Once you venture a mile or two away from your original tribe, there's these guys wearing Roman armor living in castles. The amount of stuff crammed into this game, holy fuck, it's like Kingdom Hearts or something. My own personal theory is that Guerrilla Games, after years of making stylistically dull Killzone games, wanted to do something different, so everyone in the studio had a million pent-up ideas in their head. It's as if they went around the office and asked every single person in the building what their ideas were, including the janitor, and actually put them into the game.
These guys, they go back in time, and they get all these guys, they get them all back. Everyone, Tesla gives his regards. They go back in time with cowboys. They bring ice cream to the 14th century. It's a classic story, a classic revenge. Nothing's gonna stop this from being made.
Normally, this is the part where I would begin to systematically tear the game apart, but after the prologue is over and you're set loose in the world, this game completely changes. Sure, the world is still somewhat silly, akin to walking through Epcot at Disney World, but in just about every other regard, it is as if the prologue and the rest of the game were made by two entirely different entities. The game seems to be fixated upon putting something fresh and interesting in the player's face as often as possible, and when the game engine looks this good, it ends up working. Horizon Zero Dawn's visuals are within spitting distance of Uncharted 4. It is a true technical marvel even on the original PlayStation 4 at 1080p. It runs beautifully as well. The only time I ever noticed dropped frames was in the highly populated towns, never in combat, which should be commended. That this game engine can go toe-to-toe with a game that utilizes smoke and mirror tactics should be explanation enough for why Kojima decided to use it for Death Stranding. This is hands down the best looking open world game on console. Unfortunately, the term open world comes with a lot of baggage these days, and that's the reason why I was cynical about Horizon Zero Dawn from the get-go. There's this archetype of game that's become a genre in and of itself in the past few years that I like to call pseudo-open world, spearheaded by games such as Shadow of Mordor, Assassin's Creed, and modern Far Cry. Games that follow a predictable format and confuse a map full of icons with a checklist for fun. The type of game that tells you to go here, collect this, climb this tower, and repeat for as many times as necessary to fill the 8 to 10 hour playtime that they need to sell the game. Horizon Zero Dawn is not one of these games. This is not Far Cry Primal in the third person with robots. This is a full-blown RPG in the vein of The Witcher and Mass Effect. With that comes a different set of baggage. The biggest problem I have with Western RPGs is that they often leave a lot to be desired in the realm of gameplay. After playing for 2 hours, I was convinced that Horizon Zero Dawn shared this tendency. The machines are defeated by hitting their small weak points, and hitting these precise shots felt impossible in the early moments of the game. To make matters worse, when I was able to hit them, I was doing miserably low damage. After the prologue, you can unlock an ability that slows down time temporarily to help you aim, and this, in combination with the long shot bow, completely changed the gameplay for me. The abilities in this game are not simple buffs, they are absolutely necessary to progress. Likewise, you'll want to ditch the starting bow and outfit yourself with better weapons as soon as possible. Once those issues were dealt with, I began to immensely enjoy the combat in this game. Once you get situated, the gameplay here is comparable to the Tomb Raider reboot, a real accomplishment considering that Tomb Raider is a linear action game. The only issue with the combat is that the game doesn't allow for much flexibility in how you tackle its scenarios, something that most would expect in an open world RPG. There are many fights that could be approached with a loud and proud style, but stealth is clearly what Guerrilla Games intended the player to use. Conversely, there's multiple times that scenarios trap the player in an enclosed area with no opportunity for stealth whatsoever. It's curious, then, that the ability tree is split up into 3 categories: stealth, attack, and gathering, suggesting that the player picked their own style of play. If you were to put the bulk of your points into stealth, you would be unequivocally fucked in the boss fights. Likewise, if every point was invested into attack, fighting against the human enemies would be a miserable slog. Nonetheless, this game is remarkably fun to play for what is ostensibly a AAA blockbuster. Most surprisingly, this game can be somewhat difficult at times, and it doesn't do much handholding. The stealth is somewhat challenging and not the free pass that it usually is in most big-budget titles. I can mindlessly stealth my way through most modern games that allow it, but I found myself failing and restarting stealth scenarios in Horizon Zero Dawn quite often. If you're not careful, the robots can easily decimate you as well. The deeper in you get, the more fun the combat is, as it forces you to use every skill and weapon at your disposal. It reaches the perfect level of being somewhat challenging but never frustrating, as I never had a moment in this game where I felt truly stuck. Another problem I often have with RPGs is the tendency to beat the player over the head with a dizzying amount of mechanics, items, and explanations of their systems, which make the game mentally more daunting to get into. While the prologue might have initially come off as an awkward, vapid attempt to create player empathy for Aloy, I think that it ended up serving a grander purpose, inadvertently or not. Since the prologue is entirely linear, it is able to introduce its mechanics and systems with the grace of a more simplistic, strictly linear game like Uncharted. Because of that, I never had to learn anything extra past that point. I still think that the prologue is a narrative disaster, but from a gameplay perspective, it is rather brilliant. Getting back to the story, it does ramp up and becomes decent when all is said and done. You're never being told any kind of profoundly good story, but the moment-to-moment is enjoyable enough to carry these quests. As a character, Aloy never managed to grow on me, but the eclectic cast that surrounds her eventually did. Those Roman-esque guys I mentioned earlier on, they're kind of interesting. They all worship the sun like that Dark Souls faction and are enveloped in a civil war, which plays heavily into the plot in the later acts. Their main settlement is a sight to behold as well. Earlier on, Aloy meets the mysterious Silence, who only communicates by voice initially through the focus earpiece. His voice might seem familiar, I know it certainly did to me. Turns out this is yet another mysterious, intriguing character played by Lance Reddick, who you might know from Destiny, Quantum Break, or his infamous Eric Andre interview.
I wish I would have all Britain. All y'all. All y'all. Won't speed, don't rainbow read me, nigga.
He was my favorite character in Quantum Break last year, and he is by far my favorite character in this game as well. This guy is quickly becoming my favorite video game actor. I've even inadvertently managed to play every single game he has ever been in. The boiled down version of Horizon Zero Dawn's plot is Terminator but more colorful. A man named Ted Faro creates autonomous robots that are capable of converting biomass to fuel and self-replicating, which predictably got out of control when AI was added into the mix. To counter this, a project is launched which involved creating the massive underground structures that are explored in the main questline. The rogue faction of Roman sun worshippers uncover a way to control the free-roaming robots for their own gain, and Aloy finds herself caught right in the middle of this factional power struggle, which ends up being something far greater. Divulging more than that would likely ruin the fun if you were intending on playing the game for yourself. Horizon Zero Dawn is attempting to appeal to a broad range of different tastes. Usually this ends up being the downfall of any game that attempts to do so, as in the process of appealing to these different tastes, the game just becomes a mess of watered down elements that never shine individually or as a whole. Somehow, Horizon Zero Dawn accomplishes this feat. I can see this game being appealing to people who want something straightforward like Uncharted, people who like Western RPGs like The Witcher or Mass Effect, and as much as I have come to abhor them, people who like games like Far Cry or Shadow of Mordor. Horizon Zero Dawn also offers a lot more playtime than most AAA games. It took me between 17 to 18 hours to complete the main quest line and a few side quests and activities, such as collecting the hidden items necessary to unlock this special armor. Like usual, my playtime is a little under average, as most people are taking somewhere in the 20 to 30 hour range. Regardless, even my 17 to 18 hour playtime is far longer than most games offer these days, and none of that time in the open world ever felt like a chore. It was consistently enjoyable. The prevailing issue for me with Horizon Zero Dawn is that everything in it is surface level. Nothing here made an impact on me, and I'd wager that I won't immediately remember my time with this game in a year or two. Aloy is not memorable. The world is not memorable. The story, while entertaining in the moment-to-moment, is not going to stick with you long after you finish playing. There's nothing inherently wrong with that, though. Horizon Zero Dawn is the kind of game that you hash out over the course of a few weekends or during a vacation, and there is certainly a place for those kinds of games. All things considered, I'm feeling a 7.5 out of 10 on Horizon Zero Dawn, which is the highest score I can give to a game that I know is going to fade from memory sooner rather than later. Despite that, it's a good game that any and every PlayStation 4 owner should pick up.